for introducing us. It's amazing watching everyone look at you when someone's talking about you right next to you. It's awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, so I am really lucky. As I said, I am a Cal grad. It's really awesome to be back on campus more than 2 decades later. And what's even cooler is that I get to interview my dear friend, Kyle. He and I actually met during freshman year of college, and he was one of my first friends. He and I met when he was, there's some photos, when he was 16 and I was 17, so we really grew up together. Okay. So let's get warmed up. I'm going to do a quick lightning round, and as you guys know, I work at Open Table, so it's going to be about food. So, Kyle, favorite cuisine?
Japanese.
Sweet or savory?
Sweet.
Best pizza topping? This one's controversial.
Pepperoni.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Kyle,
Classic.
if you don't mind, just put it up a little higher. Just I want to make sure people know that you said savory. This one, or is it?
I don't know. I have 2 mics on. I think
That one,
it's
yeah.
probably this one. Can you
Yeah.
guys hear me?
Yeah,
Okay.
but not when it's lower. And can you just push it up a little higher? Or
I just hold it.
that
I
one.
just hold it. Yeah, I'll just hold it.
That's better.
Yeah.
All right. Best, okay. Favorite pizza topping? Everybody has to hear this one. He really picked up.
Pepperoni.
He didn't change it. How about eating in or dining out?
Well, I think I have to say dining
Yes,
out, right?
you do. Thank you. And make that reservation on Open Table. Favorite restaurant?
Probably Rentaro.
Okay, so let's start with your journey at Cal. Even though I was there alongside you, I want you to tell everybody what your experience was like and what were some key takeaways that shaped your approach to both life and work.
So Amy mentioned this, but her and I, we've known each other for 25 years. So we were friends. My first week, I met her, and my friend Ellen's also in the audience. The network is so important. Like your personal network, and I know you guys are all Cal students. So you obviously have the Cal network, but you have to think about what is your own individual network, and you start building that actually like well before Cal, but it is really kind of in college, your first job, your second job, grad school, etc., where you continue to cultivate that. And to me, I really kind of learned the importance of that like after I graduated. I didn't realize how important it was like while I was here. And also, when you like look back, now it's been 25 years, I'm still friends with a number of the people that I met, 2 decades ago. So, in terms of my experience at Cal, the thing that, so I'll just step back actually and talk a little bit about my background. So I grew up in LA, working class family, one of 4 kids. We didn't have very much money, and so my goal was always to just accelerate through. So I started taking high school classes when I was in 7th grade. When I was 15, I got into this program at Cal State LA, which is walking distance from my home, and skipped the rest of high school, started college, was there for a year, then I transferred to Cal. And it was really at Cal at 16 where it was the first time that I felt academically challenged. I felt like I was around people that were smart, that were ambitious, that had still like a little bit of a chip on their shoulder for a variety of different reasons, and I loved it. And I think that it is a better reflection of the real world and also the technology world or the entrepreneurship world than a lot of other colleges. Like if you look at Stanford, you look at the Ivy League, the experience there is a lot more, they protect you a lot more. They tell you how great you are. They tell you, all these things. That's not how the real world is. And one of the things that I learned at Cal was like there's a tremendous amount of resources here, but you have to make your own path. Like you have to, nothing's like given to you here. And so I think that for me, like actually as a VC, I generally have a preference towards folks that embody the Cal sort of spirit as a founder than, for example, some other schools.
But what you said around networking and how building that network from a young age and knowing that now, because in VC that's a lot of what you all have to do to understand sort of connecting the dots between different founders, what they need, types of advisors that they need. Do you have any tips for budding networkers in the audience? How they should get started, how they can practice. It doesn't come that easily to everyone. I don't know about you guys, but it is definitely something that I've had to work on.
Yeah, so firstly, how many people in the audience are actively working on a startup?
Wow, that's impressive.
And how many folks here are working at a startup or part-time at a startup or entering a startup? Okay, so you probably got that job one of three ways, but most likely one of two ways. The first is you probably just like cold emailed them, or you found a connection to that startup and you got introduced to somebody on the team. Another way might be that you found a job posting and they happen to be looking for somebody of your skill set. And then the third is that somebody referred you in or just like recommended you for that. And the likelihood for the folks in this room, the likelihood of finding the best opportunity for you is probably the first one. And if there's no other options, cold emailing is fine. But trying to find anybody that is connected to a startup that you're interested in, or if you're trying to get to a potential customer, trying to find some way in through your personal network, through the Cal network, through whoever, through a childhood friend, that's kind of where I would start, because those are folks that know you best, right? And so then you kind of move from there. And it is something that is incredibly important if you ever want to start a company, because there's this saying in startups that first-time founders obsess around product, second-time founders obsess around distribution. And the reason for that is because distribution is so important. And distribution is another proxy for network, essentially. That's what companies do, right? But it's essentially networking. And so I would say that if you have aspirations to be a founder, you absolutely need to start honing your networking skills, and that just ask for help. If you don't ask, you're not going to get.
Absolutely. I think there's one other thing that you mentioned in there that I want to highlight is really navigating your own path. Can you talk a little bit about that after you got to college? Then how did you navigate into sort of the majors that you ended up deciding to major in, and then finding your full-time opportunity after that?
So I think that I ended up at Cal partly because I was trying to get the heck out of LA. So I wanted to leave LA, and my parents were really pressuring me to stay in California because I was so young, and I really wanted to go as far away as possible. So I was like, okay, well, I grew up in a household where we didn't travel very much. We didn't I was just kind of just in the LA bubble, and so to me, coming to Cal was both fortuitous because I think it's actually very different than Southern California, but also it was a very deliberate choice in that the more I learned about it, the more I was like, this is the type of university I want to go to, the research power, the types of students that come here, and I had a great time. when I was here. And so sorry, what was the question again?
Navigating your path here that led you to
Yeah.
your first job after college.
So before I get to my first job, so one of the things that I think was transformational for me at Cal was my decision to study abroad. And it's kind of going back to my background where I hardly ever traveled, and so I took a risk and I said my senior year, first semester, actually it's my last semester in college, I decided instead of staying here, I was going to study abroad in Hong Kong. And I had never been to Asia before. I had no idea what to expect. I was 19, I think I just turned 19. And I was like, okay, I'm going to go to Asia, I'm going to study abroad. And it just so happened to be 2003. And I'm not sure, does anybody remember what happened in 2003 in Asia? I know the dean does, but anybody else? So there was this thing called SARS, which at the time, before COVID-19, was probably the most kind of prolific kind of pandemic that had happened. And one of the epicenters was in Hong Kong, which is where I happened to be. And it was a very scary time because it was sort of like, oh, so, some student in the hall has a fever and this, and then the entire school shut down. But the experience itself, to me, was just incredibly memorable because A, I got to meet students from all around the world. B, I got to experience Asia for the first time. And it was just transformational for me. So when I came back, I had set a goal for myself that at some point in the near future, I was going to go and work in Asia because I saw the growth. And again, this is 2004. And when it comes to charting your own path, it's important to remember and really kind of think about where is the puck going, right? I think that's a Wayne Gretzky coaching thing, and my partner Ben at Bling has been great at this. It's like, where's the puck going? And if there's one regret that I had while I was at Cal, it's that I didn't spend enough time really studying technology trends. I spent a lot of time, because I was a business major, thinking about investing, and so I went into private equity. But I think that thinking about where the world is going, and today the obvious answer is some sort of AI. But that's really important in terms of charting your own path. So when I decided, after I graduated from Cal, I went to work at a firm called Pantheon, doing private equity secondaries. And I did that specifically because as I looked at kind of investing trends, the dot-com bust had happened. Enron, if you guys remember that, which you probably don't because you're too young, but Anderson went under. It was what used to be the big 5 accounting firms. Anderson went under, it became the big 4 because of this Enron scandal. We were in a deep recession, and I had studied sort of what was going on in kind of private markets, and I thought there would be huge opportunity doing private equity secondaries, and that's why I ended up at Pantheon. And it was a very controversial choice at the time because a lot of my friends were going into investment banking or consulting, and nobody had heard about private equity secondaries because it was a new industry, and I was there right as Pantheon had raised their first $1 billion fund, which at the time was a massive fund. I think there was a PE secondaries firm last week that announced a $30 billion fund. So the industry has just grown tremendously. But being there early, I think, gave me a lot of that perspective. And then also, after 2 years, gave me the opportunity to go to Asia.
Okay, well, talk a little bit about what it was like working in private equity in Asia between, I think, 2006 and 2009. I didn't get to Asia until way later than you, but that was
It felt like the Wild Wild West. I mean, that wasn't the intention. I didn't know it was the Wild Wild West.
Yeah.
I just knew that I wanted to go to Asia, and so after 2 years as an analyst, I was promoted, and they said you can stay in San Francisco, or there's a role for you in Hong Kong, and I was like, well, I'm taking a Hong Kong role. And I was out there for 3 years. I traveled all across Asia, from India, China, down to Australia, kind of covering private equity. And in China, it was just so happened to be the time when all of the US venture capital firms were setting up joint ventures with local Chinese entities because you couldn't go into China alone. You had to set up a JV. It was also during that time period that the Chinese government decided that if you wanted to be in China, you needed to follow their rules. And so Google left. Then they had their own, like kind of local tech companies that came in. And I saw the beginning of this, and so it was a really, really valuable time. But also in 2008, something else happened, which is Lehman Brothers went under. And so it went from being this big boom to suddenly the markets had completely stopped. Layoffs globally, it was very related to the mortgage crisis that happened and the global financial crisis. And so in 2008, I decided, okay, I think it's time for me to come back to the US. And that was another deliberate choice because I decided to go to business school. And I think the other thing that I was considering was potentially maybe just coming to San Francisco and maybe trying to get a job in tech. But my background was very much, at the time, very finance oriented. And it was not technology oriented at all. And so I decided to specifically go to HBS because I wanted something different. I wanted to be on the East Coast, and I thought HBS is the strongest network, the global network, and so that's why I went there.
So after HBS, you started your own company that eventually got acquired by Salesforce, as you all heard. What was your intent behind starting that company? What went well? What could have gone better?
So I actually started two companies. I don't talk as much about the first one. So I started a company while I was in business school with a good friend of mine. It's a company called Scanwell Health, and we had this crazy idea to use your smartphone to do at-home diagnostics. And we were taking a course at MIT, and so we're like, hey, you can do this research project, or you just start a company, get credit. We're like, let's just start a company. So we started coming together, and it was super fun. And I realized, like, wow, there's so many things that I don't know. And a lot of folks were like, well, Kyle, like, you have an offer to join a hedge fund, you can just go there. And I was like, no, I think I'm gonna just do this 180. And the thing with these inflection points is that when you're thinking about your own narrative, right, it's the first 30 seconds of how you describe yourself, which is how other people are going to think of you or perceive you. And so at HBS, having come from Asia, having worked in Asia, having worked in finance, that was sort of my initial identity in business school. But what I had observed was that the brightest people at HBS my year had no interest in working at a company. They had no interest in finance. Everybody was starting companies. And I looked at, for example, one of my good friends and my workout partner, Anthony Tan, who founded Grab, right? He was like, oh, I'm gonna go and start a company. I looked at a bunch of my friends who ultimately ended up starting companies like Oscar and Stitch Fix and Everly Health and et cetera, just in my class and the class above me, the founders of Cloudflare. And to me, like, they were just, like students and friends. And that really gave me the motivation to say, okay, I'm gonna start a company. And so the second company I started was a lot more deliberate because I'd kind of taken I learned a lot from my first startup, and it was before the days of the FDA knowing telemedicine was, and so I'm gonna leave that startup. Stephen was the CEO, I was a co-founder with him to start my second company where I was the CEO. And one of my big motivations for starting a company was actually my current VC partner, Ben, who spoke here last semester. His background has fully been in tech, and I worked for him for a bit when I was at HBS, interning for him when he was director of product at Google. And in classic sort of business school fashion, I was like, okay, I'm gonna hedge my bets. So I'm thinking about starting a company, but I also interview at early stage startups. And so I interviewed at a few kind of YC startups, and I pitched myself really well, and they all gave me offers. And I asked Ben, I was like, hey, I'm thinking about starting a company, but I have these offers to join an early stage company that's just gotten seed funding, and I'll join them as director of ops, just doing a bunch of different things. And he was like, you should start a company. He's like, and I will be your first investor. And so like that's kind of how it all started.
That's
I don't think I knew this. That's very cool. Let's transition a little bit to what the sale was like and transitioning from being a startup founder CEO into a large behemoth of a company like Salesforce. Did that get you the operational experience that you were hoping to get? What was that like?
So again, I think that the whole skating to where the puck is going. So I started ChoicePass. The initial idea for ChoicePass was not the idea that ultimately we ended up kind of getting customers and getting revenue on. The original idea we had was when, and you're going to remember this, but I don't know if other people in the audience remember this, but the days of when Groupon and Living Social were the king of the hill. And those were going to be the next $100 million companies, and they were bringing customers in droves, and how do you kind of get them to stay? And so we're like, ChoicePass was going to be a platform to focus on retention. And then as we were talking to business owners, they were talking about the challenges that they were having around sales, and then we started to kind of create products around performance management for sales people, actually. And then we had a product that was around enabling the rewards for rewarding non-salespeople that help the sales process. And Salesforce was really interested in that product technology. They were also our biggest customer, and they were moving very, very heavily into HR at the time. It was in 2012, and Mark Benioff, that was his first year where he was making lots and lots of acquisitions. And so they had just acquired a company called Ripple, which is a Canadian company that was doing social recruiting and some other things, and they were looking to augment their product offering. And so then they talked to me about, hey, are you interested in being acquired? And it was pretty early. We were like 10 employees. We had like $1 million in ARR. But like the opportunity for me I thought about it, and I thought about the ability to work at the time, the only real SaaS company that mattered. This is in 2012, when a lot of VCs were still not convinced that SaaS was a thing. And so I decided to sell the company and go there, and like my investors made money, and I made some money, but it was really kind of the opportunity to then be part of, build something bigger within Salesforce. And that was where I saw the power of distribution, because within 2 years, the ChoicePass product, which has been repackaged into Work.com, went from $1 million to $40 million in AR. And it was because you had the entire Salesforce army behind you, and this was like part of Salesforce.
And from there, how did you know that you wanted to go into investing? And how did you make that switch from sort of being at Salesforce and having seen the product that you created sort of soar like that? What made you want to?
I knew within 6 months of me joining Salesforce that I wasn't going to be there long term. It was the largest company that I worked in for multiple orders of magnitude, and it was such a valuable experience for me because of the network that I built and the learnings that I had. And I was also put into this position as a director of product on the Sales Cloud side, which at the time was 80% of Salesforce's revenues. And so the learnings that I had was just, again, like exponential. And then I decided that, okay, I'm probably going to start another company. And so I started ideating. I was like, okay, who am I going to hire from Salesforce and from my network to start another company? And it just so happened that I got a call from a recruiter saying, hey, are you interested in venture capital? And I was like, well, no, not really. And I have relationships with VCs now. At the time, Ben, who was my first angel investor, then went to Khosla, where he was a GP. And they had been interested, like Ben had been interested in like recruiting me over, and I was like, I'm not interested in venture capital. And they're like, hey, just have like one meeting with this guy, Jason Krikorian, who's also a Cal grad. He's the founder of Sling, and he just recently joined DCM. And I was like, okay, well, I had heard of DCM because DCM was amongst the very first Sand Hill Road firms to move into Asia. and I'd heard about them because they were one of the firms I kind of came across when I was in Asia. And so I was like, okay, I'll have one meeting, and that led to 2 meetings and more meetings, and 6 months later, as I was kind of approaching my second year at Salesforce and approaching kind of my earnout, I decided to take a chance and join. And I had a thesis at the time that Asia was going to be a much larger part of deal making in Silicon Valley. So again, it was that, what is the charting your own path? Because the natural thing would be, okay, I would start a company. If I moved into venture, moved to, there were a number of other firms that I was pretty close to that were better known in the Valley at the time than DCM, but I didn't care. Like I was like, well, I was a startup founder. Like when you're a startup founder, you're just pitching yourself and pitching your startup all the time. And so I found the opportunity to go to DCM where they had built a tremendous kind of cross-border platform and use that as sort of like my narrative. And I thought, okay, I'll be there for a year or two and kind of see the trends, and I ended up staying there for 7.5 years. It was a great experience.
How did you just, I guess I'm gonna pivot a little bit and talk a bit about sort of the 7.5 years you had there, some of the unicorn investments that you made. Many of us know what they do and how that came to be. But on the flip side, I wanted you to talk through sort of one investment that you may have thought about differently.
So Ease is the Uber for cannabis, and I was one of the first investors in the cannabis space, and this is in 2014, so I was new to venture. I had met them actually because they were interested in me being like angel investor in the company, and I had a hypothesis that on the regulatory side, things were going to change a lot faster than what actually ended up happening. So it's a company that ended up raising hundreds of millions of dollars, getting into a number of different states. At one point, there was a lot of potential, but the regulatory headwinds were just too strong. And so they ended up ultimately shutting down. They then filed for bankruptcy, and then they are operating again, but the original investors all got wiped out. And so, and I think that going back, I probably would have spent more time really thinking through whether this is a regulatory change that was going to happen in the short term, or whether it's something that's more of a 10 or 20-year trend. It ended up being more of a 10, it still hasn't happened yet, but 10 to 20-year trend. And so that's really important because in venture, you need to kind of get the timing just right or within right. You don't want to be late to it, but you don't want to be too early. And I feel like with ESA, it's probably a little too early. But I don't regret it because it was a wonderful ride and a great ride. And the thing with venture, just like with entrepreneurship, is that people remember your winners, and they don't remember these other companies. And at least you gave it a shot. So.
Okay.
What is one of the most interesting investor pitches that you've heard that you ended up, either investing or not, but something that sticks out? How do you grab a VC's attention as a startup founder?
There's a couple of questions there. I think in terms of the way that, so now that I'm a general partner at Bling, the way that we look at, we invest very early, so pre-seed, seed, generally before product market fit. The firm was started by my partner Ben Ling in 2018. I joined him in 2022 to expand the partnership. The thing we always tell our founders is you need to come into the meeting prepared. That's the first thing. And being prepared it's like 90% of it. And what I mean by that is that there's typical investor questions. What's the TAM? Why are you guys the right team to build this? What does competition look like? And understanding all of that so that you can anticipate those investor questions is just so critical. I feel like 90% of whether you end up, not 90%, but a big part of whether you end up successful or not is just how prepared you are. And then there's also a big element of luck. And so those two things are really, really important. So right place, right time, plus you're really prepared. If you're really prepared, it gives you the opportunity to also be in the right place, right time. And so one of the startups that I was fortunate enough to be investor in is Hims and Hers, which is at the time is just Hims, and at the time only had two products, which is a finasteride product for hair loss, and then another product around like sexual wellness. And so the pitch when I met Andrew was like, okay, here's somebody who is just determined to change the world, just determined to build something very, very large, and he had some unique insights. One of the unique insights that he had was these are perpetual problems that men have that they're embarrassed to talk about, that they don't want to go to their primary care physician to talk about, and it's something that is a recurring, long-term kind of chronic thing. And we want to be able to make it accessible. We want to have something that marketing actually resonates. And it was kind of, at the time, I had just started thinking about the consumerization of healthcare and how broken kind of traditional healthcare was, and how you had to go to your primary care physician for everything, and we went through insurers, and like Hims kind of was an early pioneer in flipping that narrative. And so it really kind of resonated with me, both him and then also the market that he was going after. So basically, compelling founders, large markets.
Okay, you heard it here. Product market fit and very large TAM and distribution. As the students are preparing for their careers, and many here are looking to start their own company, as you saw the hands raising, and also working at startups, what kind of tech trends, aside from AI, are you bullish on?
There's just so many. I mean, when we study, so firstly, one of the exercises that we've done internally is we've looked at all of the largest publicly traded companies, like the top, 500, like the companies on the S&P 500, NASDAQ, the Cloud 100, and what are those companies that are not embracing AI? We think that AI is such a massive platform shift that if you're not embracing it, you're probably ripe for disruption. And who are the startups that are then, who are the most compelling founders that are then going after those problems and have a unique point of view? And so there's so it is like broadly AI, but like it's hard to say that because we think AI will be a part of every successful company going forward. So it really is then the individual trends. We're really excited right now around vertical AI around traditional industries. So a lot of industries that historically have still been on pen and paper are still operating on some of the larger tech dinosaurs, the SAPs and Oracles, et cetera, of the world. There's a lot of opportunity there to take market share away from some of these incumbent players. And the most interesting thing around AI is actually not the technology. The technology is really exciting to study and see, and there's a real there. But actually the most exciting thing around AI is because of how hyped it is, every boardroom, every Fortune 500 company is thinking about how they're going to leverage AI for their business. And it drastically accelerated enterprise sales cycles. So again, going back to that distribution question versus kind of like product, I mean, you have to have a good product, but now there's such a ripe opportunity to get in front of the right decision makers that are trying to actually adopt technology, and we haven't seen that in quite some time.
It's exciting times we're living in now. Okay, I'm going to do one last question before we open it up to everyone here. What is the one class that you must, like you're telling everyone that they must take, aside from this one, before they graduate from Cal? One that you couldn't live without.
I really think that everyone should have like a base level understanding of computer science. So if I had to pick like one, and it doesn't need to be at Cal, it could be online, but like a base level understanding, because I think if you're going to go into tech, you have to have that base level understanding. I don't know if this is a controversial view or not because I don't know the backgrounds of everybody in the class, but I think that in 10 years' time, software engineering is completely commoditized. I don't think it's going to be, like being a software engineer is no longer going to be the path to making millions of dollars like it potentially is today if you work your way up the corporate ladder and then you're, like a L8 or an L9 at Google or Facebook. I think that the AI technologies is rapidly commoditizing that, and so getting ahead of that trend. But you also have to have a base level understanding of technology. But I think that it opens up the doors for everybody else to, if you have that base level understanding, to really take advantage of this platform shift.
That is one class that I think every single day we're at a tech company. Like, God, if I only knew how to read code. So that is the one thing I didn't do and should have done. Well, thank you, Kyle. We're going to open up to questions now. So for those of you who are asking questions, we're going to repeat it so folks listening on the recording can hear. Any questions? I'm really good at cold calling, too.
Oh, I've got a question.
All right.
It has to do with these pictures right here. It looks like that is you with...
I can tell about these photos. So Vicky asked, hey, can you share a few photos and stuff, story behind this. So the photo on the top left, that's our early ChoicePass team. So this is us at a team event, and so I wanted to show that. That was from 2011. The picture on the right was, so a friend of mine who's a VC, he was a first investor in Sam Altman's original company, Looped, and so at the time, so in 2011, Sam was a good friend of mine. We were just like startup founders. Like he was founding Loop, I was founding ChoicePass.
That could be the happiest I've ever seen Sam Altman look.
It's a goofy photo, so this is him being goofy. So that's what that photo is. And the reason I posted that was because, again, like power the network and getting to know so it's probably a lot harder to try to get to know Sam now or like whoever the next Sam is going to be versus like who folks will be. And so I think that how you spend your time, the folks that you decide to invest in is as equally important as like how you decide to, what you decide to pursue in your career. And then the other two pictures, this is my partner Ben, who spoke last semester. It's a photo of us from, I think this picture is 15 years old. This picture was last year. But I just wanted to show him because, we've been friends for a long time and now we're business partners.
What's it like working with such a long time friend?
It's great. It really is like awesome. It doesn't always work, but like you have to, for us it works. Yeah. Ashwin?
Kyle, with this like huge shift in AI, what do you think in the next, let's say 10 years, like which skills do you think are going to be most rewarded, like in terms of like creativity skills, like what would you say are the top 3 skills that you think will like really allow people to have the biggest like economic value pretty much?
I really subscribe to, and I don't know if it's Sam that initially said this or somebody else, but
the question was around the 3 key skills.
The 3 skills over the next 10 years are the most valuable. I really subscribe to what Sam said, where it's like we will start to see startups where it's like, I mean, this is an exaggeration, but like one person, $1 of funding, $1 billion startup. Like I think startups are getting a lot more efficient, and so with that, I think that like the top skill is your ability to manage like AI agents, right? So understanding how to leverage them, implementation, product, everything kind of related. Because I do think you will start to see startups just become incredibly more efficient because of where agents are going to quality them. So I don't know about the top 3 skills, but I think that's the trend that I think about kind of down the road.
As someone who kind of just like made it out of LA basically.
Do you mind also introducing yourself really quickly, just who you are, what you're saying?
Yeah, my name is Josh. I'm uncleared, but I'm applying for computer science. My question is, as someone who, you know, when you're coming out of an area out of like necessity, you kind of have grit, maybe have like a chip on your shoulder. What are some of the traits that were useful to success, and what were the traits that you think were harmful and that you had to get rid of because they were in your work?
So the question is, as someone with a chip on their shoulder, what are the qualities that you think are helpful? I guess in like entrepreneurship or career, and then what are the traits that are potentially harmful? It's an important question. I think that the perennial chip on your shoulder is almost critical to be a founder. Like you feel like you have something to prove. Like those are the types of founders that I feel can really go all the way. There's this story that one of a very well-known VC that was on the Facebook board told me when Zuck had an offer to sell his company for $1 billion to Yahoo, and he was like, well, I don't know what I would do. I mean, I would just probably start another social network, and I kind of already like the one that I have. So he had something to prove that, like, it's not about getting $1 billion. It's about I can build something a lot bigger. And so I think that chip on your shoulder, that perennial chip on your shoulder, where you're constantly kind of thinking big, is a critical part for being a founder. On the other side of it, I think that it's important to control your own narrative. And so what I mean by that is you should look at, as people are giving you constructive feedback, or people are trying, that you're looking at from the lens of like, they're trying to help you as opposed to being combative. Because I've seen this with some founders where they're like, oh, I have a chip on my shoulder because, I grew up in this like rough environment, or I come from this particular background, and like you wouldn't understand, and it's difficult, I think, for when in venture we have this saying like, is this person coachable? And the reason we say that is because if you have strong beliefs that are tightly held that can never be changed even in the face of data, you're probably not going to be a very good entrepreneur, because at the end of the day, you're going to have to look at the data and like pivot and adjust, and so we like to back founders that are stubborn enough so that they're not going to fold, but not so stubborn that they won't change direction in the face of data. And so it's really kind of that balance that's really important. But I would kind of approach conversations with someone who might be completely different from you, like, okay, what's the perspective this person's trying to help me? Like, what's the lesson here? As opposed to like entering it in a combative way because maybe this person just has a very different background than you. And just to be clear about what I'm saying, I mean, this has changed a little bit, but when I started in venture, 95% of VCs were straight white guys. And so, if you were not a straight white guy and, then you automatically come from a different background than the person you're pitching, it could, if the narrative kind of comes off like too combative, it's probably a no. And so, that's not something that's going to change overnight. And so I think that the entrepreneurs are able to kind of control that narrative and understand kind of how to balance that, to be like, okay, I have my entrenched, these are the insights I have, the beliefs that I have, that this is the chip on my shoulder, but also be open to feedback.
Over here.
Okay, so my name is Sean, and my major is civil engineering. So my question is from an investor perspective. Where do you think the future of civil engineering lies? Should it continue toward construction, or should it shift towards like AI? So currently, there
So the question is, how is, as a civil engineering major, how do you navigate this trend within AI, and how do I think about civil engineering in the context of, so how do I think of AI in the context of civil engineering? I think it's absolutely a vertical that will be disrupted by AI. I think that if you think about the trends around AI, it's anything that's where it's knowledge-based, where there is, where more and more data is going to be helpful to making decisions. And I think that it will open up a whole new set of opportunities for people that are trained in civil engineering. I think it's actually kind of like the golden era for anything that is like technology, engineering-oriented, accounting-oriented, legal, business. All of those areas I think will be disrupted, but there will be new opportunities for folks that can leverage AI to essentially, where everybody is like a 10x, this concept of 10x engineer, it gives you that opportunity.
Tracy Young has a civil engineering background. She did auto grid and now she's doing Tiger Eye. She's coming to talk in a couple weeks. Ask her that question again.
Okay.
So I guess I'm keeping with the fun AI theme. Oh, sorry, I'm Richard. My degree says in engineering physics, but I like to say I majored in glue. I hold different things together. So we saw recently with like UC, right? Like overnight, $1 trillion gone, right? And so how do we see this? Like, because right now AI is very much like, here are the 3 companies that you go to for this, right? And the idea of like dollar single person, that like can't happen with like centralized AI. Do you think that we're going to see like a pivot towards like democratized AI, like you run it locally?
Absolutely. I think it's all moving towards open source. I think that you've seen OpenAI kind of come out and say that they were on the wrong side of that trade, and they'll kind of move more towards that. I mean, it has to, and that's why I'm really excited about the application layer of AI, because if you think about the LLM layer and the foundational layer being much more commoditized and the cost of compute coming down, I mean, that was the big moat that OpenAI had initially, was like they had billions of dollars in funding from Microsoft because they can afford it, and they also gave them free GPUs. And so I think that DeepSeek was actually a step in the right direction, in that it adds more global competition. And I think there's a lot of things that DeepSeek and the Chinese government are not being forthright about, like what it took to develop that. I don't think that's controversial. I mean, I think they're obviously going to market things as rosy as possible, but I do think that it's good for the application layer, which I think is where a lot of the value will accrue.
Yeah, I'm Peter. I'm a applied math and comp sci major, and I actually want to continue the first question about like what's the key ability we need to hold during the AI era. That what kind of position that a guy first graduates from college should pursue if we don't want to become a software engineer, like don't want to be replaced by AI, but still we want to get into AI industry.
The question is, if you're a graduating student and you don't want to be a software engineer, how else can you take advantage?
What role do they look for that's in AI but not software engineering?
I think that all of these companies are going to need really strong business people and really strong product people, because ultimately, I think if you think about the experience of AI being embedded in everything, you're still going to need product owners. You're still going to need people that are going to figure out like how do you make money from it. And so I'd say those are 2 areas. Yeah.
Hi, my name's Nathan. I'm an EECS major. Thank you guys again for coming and giving a talk. And my question is a little bit more like, I guess, personal, like on the advice side. If you guys could give one piece of advice to like your younger selves, or like everyone in the classroom who's interested in like their careers or pursuing entrepreneurship, what's like one piece of advice you give to like yourselves to start your career or to like
work really, really hard in the early days. Oh, the question is, what is one piece of advice that I would give my younger self? Or anybody that's pursuing entrepreneurship, and it's to work really, really hard, because I think working really hard leads to working really hard and also working really smart, because I think that what that means is that when you work hard, it's all about learning. right? And so what is it that you're able to learn in like a finite amount of time? And the reason it's important is because it compounds over time. If you work really, really hard in your 20s and you learn a lot and you're at the right companies, then you have potentially a couple things. One is people perceive you to work really, really hard, and if you're effective, they also perceive you as smart, and you start to build your network. And if really smart people at your prior company decide to go and start another company, then they may call you and be like, hey, you should join us, at this company. And that's exactly what happened with Ben. He was at Google, and a bunch of his colleagues went over to Facebook, and so he ended up going to Facebook as the first director of platform. And so it's both related to network, right, and your perception, how other people perceive you, but it's all related to hard work. And I don't believe, especially in the earlier part of your career, I don't believe in work-life balance. I think and the reason I don't believe in work-life balance is that everything is a trade-off. And so this idea that you can have it all, like I just don't believe that. Everything is a trade-off. So ultimately, if you want to be a successful entrepreneur, you have to live and breathe that thing. Because if you don't, somebody else will. And that person will probably win out if they're working harder than you and opening the right doors and networking, and the rate of learning goes faster, right? Like there's a saying that we tell our founders that at the early stages, when you are just starting out, you basically are going 0 to 1. You have no advantage in anything. But if you can move faster, if you can in like chess, for example, if you can move 2 steps or 3 steps every time someone who is a grandmaster can only move 1 step, then there is a real chance that you can beat them because you are moving multiple times and you're iterating. And that is literally the analogy between like the David and Goliath. If you think about Goliath as the incumbent that you're trying to disrupt.
I think a different way of saying what Kyle was saying is how my parents taught me to be, is choose to have a hard year. Everything else we're doing is going to be hard. So when it's hard, you're learning, and you're learning to apply, and then try to think through all of the things. When you listen to success stories of this startup or this founder, try to understand sort of the frameworks and then apply it to the problem you have to solve. That's like real life application that I actually think is the most useful in work and in life. But it's supposed to be hard when you're doing all the right things right. So yeah, work hard. That's what he's saying. I agree with him. None of this was easy. Being a mom's not easy. Being a COO is not easy. Making decisions every day is not easy.
I think the questions over here. Did you all stop your questions?
I have one. And mine is, so I learned this week in another class that you need capital and execution to make a business happen. And now you're adding network, capital, and execution for a good business or an idea to come into fruition. What else will you add to that formula? Network, plus capital, plus execution, plus people.
I think the 2 things I would. So the question is, you've learned that some critical elements to start up are execution, capital, and now add network. What else would add to that, right? As a perspective of a startup founder?
Yeah, and your own personal experience.
Well, from my experience, I think 2 additional things I would add to that would be passion for the problem that you're solving, because it's a long journey. And then the other one is it's escaping me right now, but I'll come back to it. There's another one that I wanted to chat about.
I think it's fascinating, and I think it's important that product is not part of it.
Oh, I remember what it is now. It's market size. Yeah. The reason market size is so important is because if you're going after a market that's really tiny, you yourself can make, it just depends on the type of company that you're starting. If you're trying to go the venture capital route, you have to go and pursue a really large TAM, because you can have the best product, the best distribution. If your TAM is limited, you're not going to be able to get there to become ultimately a public company one day. Whereas if the TAM is huge, it could actually support multiple public companies. The reason I didn't include total addressable market, so it's the size of the number of customers willing to pay you for your product, right? And so so in enterprise, it's typically how many customers are there paying you what, and then what percentage of the market does that represent? So that's a critical exercise, and you want that number to ideally be in the billions, if not tens of billions or beyond, because it means that you're operating in like a very, very large ocean.
I just have a simple general question. So how can, sorry, I'm Zainab, an energy engineering student. How can startups reach out to the right investors, and also how can they make themselves stand out? I mean, there are a lot of startups nowadays, and the market is big, and competition is really hard. So how can those startups reach out to the right investors and convince them of their ideas?
It's the power of the network, and it's your power of your own network. And so the question is, like, how do you get to those VCs? And you start out just like how you're just building your network. So you can start with the Cal network, you can start with your friends and family, you start with like your first job, and it's just about leveraging everybody. Like when I was an entrepreneur, I literally thought about who's everybody that I know. Like, it doesn't matter if I went to school with you, if I my sister knows somebody, like Amy knows somebody. It's like every person that you know, and how do you get to somebody that can help you with, my hiring or my customer development or my funding, like these things. So, in the red.
Hi, Kyle, Amy. I'm Mahul, a first-year EEC student, and I want to go back to AI for a minute. So I grew up in Germany, but coming here, when you talk to literally anyone, what are they building? It always has something to do with AI agents, blockchain, machine learning, and almost everyone around you is building some kind of GPT wrapper. But like you said, the startups that are successful, they operate in a very particular vertical. They're generally solving a problem. But as a student who doesn't really have any niche insights about some particular space, how do I really go about finding genuine problems to solve? How do I go about finding insights in a space that I can understand really well so that you can actually apply AI to solve the problem of that vertical?
It's an important question. So the question is, as a student, how do you go about finding the problems that you're really interested in solving, and then getting those insights? I think that for the majority of students that are interested in entrepreneurship, your first step may not be to start a company. I think your first step it will be helpful for the vast majority of folks to go and work at a company, and ideally work at a startup of some capacity. If you have a very good idea about the space that you want to go into, then I would recommend working at a very early stage startup where you can even be part of the founding team, because you will get direct mentorship, ideally direct mentorship and exposure to the CEO. But if you don't yet know and you're looking to kind of expand your network and expand your knowledge, then going and working for the most reputable company that will take you, right? And that's probably not, I don't think that the most interesting companies to work for out of college today are the Googles and Metas and possibly NVIDIA, just because they're doing some interesting things. It's probably some growth stage company that's just growing really fast, right? And as part of that, you're going to get a lot of exposure to really great people. And from that, then there could be some unique insights of like, okay, what is this problem that I'm encountering? Or maybe you meet someone that has the problem that you're encountering and they decide to start a company and you may join them, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's how it will start for the majority of students, not like starting a company out of school.
There's about 4 more questions. Should we go?
Yeah, Vicky, why don't you pick the questions?
Yeah, there on the end. Yes, you.
Hey, Kyle. Thank you so much for the talk. I thought it was interesting that early on in your career you took a bet and you went over to Hong Kong to do private equity. I was wondering, how confident are you
good question.
The question is, how confident am I in the Bay Area being the center of technology, right? In the short term, very confident. In the long term, much less confident. I think that there was this move to different technology centers during COVID because of remote work, and I think that people are discovering that remote work is really hard and doesn't always work, and actually doesn't work very well for startups in particular. And so I think that there's been a move back to the Bay. And so I think that right now, a lot of the AI talent is really concentrated here. If you look at the stats, I think 35% of the AI and machine learning engineers are in the Bay Area. Seattle's number 2 at 23%. The difference between Seattle and the Bay Area is that a lot of the AI engineers in the Bay Area are really interested in working at startups, whereas in Seattle, most of the AI engineers are just interested in working at Microsoft and Amazon and other large companies. That is starting to change slowly, but I think that it will require this unique combination of of technical talent plus risk-seeking behavior, plus the funding, plus a robust funding ecosystem to have any ecosystem that will challenge the Bay Area. I think New York was getting close as number 2 before AI, because frankly a lot of people want to live in New York and it's like a very appealing place, et cetera, et cetera. But right now I think that the Bay Area is by far number 1. I think that, so the question is, how do you evaluate your own path, especially when it deviates from the standard norms? I think I would highly encourage everybody here to think about your career like it is the most important kind of like investment, because you're investing a really valuable resource, which is your time, which you can't get back. And so you should look at any opportunity from that lens of, okay, well, if I were an investor in this company, how would I look at it? How would I look at all of the things that I would look at as a VC, right? And so if you don't know what those things are, try to if they have existing funding, go and try to talk to some of their VCs, try to see who they are, just study that overall market and see if you think it's going to be an interesting opportunity. Because I think that if you think that it is going to be the next, say, Google, or the next OpenAI, or the next rocket ship, then just get on. It's like, just take that role and join as soon as possible, because the timing matters, right? But if you don't have that confidence, or then I think you got to think about what is it that you'll be gaining from this experience. Is it the opportunity to work really closely with the founding team or the CEO, or is it the opportunity to pivot your skill set? Because for example, I used to get this question a lot, not as much anymore because it's been a while since I've worked in product, but I would get this question. I was like, hey, Kyle, I'm interested in going into product. Like, how do I go about doing that? And there's no right answer. It's not like there's like a school you go to and suddenly you're a product manager. It's actually very different than the software engineering side. There's PMs that come from engineering. There's PMs that come from business. There's PMs that come from operations. They come from all over. They come from different sets, right? But the reason why I think product is really interesting is because a lot of PMs ultimately, those that are entrepreneurial, end up starting their own companies because they're thinking about it from the product first lens, and there's this problem that I want to solve. How do I think about it from a first principles product perspective? And then you layer in the distribution.
Let's go for 2 more questions from somebody who hasn't asked a question. Yes.
Hi, my name is Sanik. I'm a first-year data science major, and I have a question that if you have ever faced co-founder conflict, how would you exactly deal with it? How would you overcome that obstacle?
The question is, have you ever dealt with co-founder conflict, and how do you overcome that obstacle? So the answer is yes, it happens all the time. It happens more often than you think, even for funded startups, even for folks that have known each other for a long time. And there's really no right answer. Like, the question that I use as a VC, I see this, amongst my portfolio. If there's founders that have conflicts, I just ask them, is this conflict that is it a solvable conflict or is it unsolvable conflict? If it's like, differences that cannot be resolved, then you kind of unfortunately have to call it, and you have to, decide both amongst the investor group and the stakeholders, like, which founder you're gonna back. Sometimes the founder just leaves because of conflict, but it is one of the single largest questions that we have. The way that we mitigate that is we have things like 4-year vesting, 1-year cliff, these types of things to help manage the cap table and such. But as a startup founder, I think that you have to really think about, okay, is this a type of person that is just as dedicated as you are and is complementary to your skill set and that will be in this for a long term. Like, one of the reasons we sold ChoicePass actually was like my co-founder wasn't as bought in to ultimately what we were doing. And so like, okay, like maybe we should consider, one path is consider selling, right? And so it is like an important consideration to think about if your goal is to kind of, ultimately drive this to a large successful outcome at the end of the day, which is not always why people want to start companies. So.
If we can take one more question back there, front row of the second half of the message.
Yeah, I'm Krish. I'm a senior studying data science. So I want to work as an operator and then maybe after a couple of years become an investor as well. So I was really wondering what does your day-to-day look like as an investor? And then a second part to that is what are some aspects of the job that you don't really like but you kind of learned to accept now?
So the question is, what is the day-to-day like as a VC, and what are some aspects of it that I don't really enjoy?
That did not enjoy.
That I did not enjoy, but I've learned to accept, right?
Yes.
So firstly, I love my job. I think that it's a tremendous privilege to meet with entrepreneurs on a daily basis and be, at least for some period of time, walk through their dream and their journey and kind of collaborate with them, even if it's for an hour or 2 hours, whatever. And so I love that aspect of it. It is not the full part of the job. There's a big part of it is, 9% of companies that we end up meeting with, we don't end up getting there. So there's a lot of saying no or not right now. I actually don't mind that. I think that it's important to be kind of straightforward. I think that there is this perception that VC is a quote unquote easy job sometimes because it's like, oh, well, like you're not like building yourself, you're providing the money, but actually it's a really hard job because it's really hard to actually make money because oftentimes there's a lot of like noise. And a big part of being a VC is actually sales and networking. And if you think about what we do, it's we raise money from institutional investors. Those investors are committed to being part of our fund for 10 years in a blind pool. So that huge part of that is the story and the sales and the narrative. And the very best venture firms spend very limited amount of time fundraising, and their funds are typically oversubscribed, so they can spend all of their time with their entrepreneurs. But they're only able to spend all their time with the entrepreneurs if they're really good at selling the LP story, and ultimately that means performance as well, but in the early days you may not have that performance. And so that is a typical aspect that a lot of people starting venture funds don't realize how hard it is to like raise money for it. But honestly, Ben and I love it. Like we love that aspect of the job because I think it makes us better VCs. And it's like, it's what our entrepreneurs have to do. So like, we love doing it ourselves.
This talk has been full of so many nuggets of wisdom. We are filming. I recommend that everybody rewatch it. Having both of you all here in this conversation has just been really priceless. I don't know how else to say it. So thank you all very, very much. I don't know if you can stay for a few minutes. I know that a couple of students had questions that they couldn't ask, and they may come up. I'll put up our slide bling. In case anybody's wondering, could you tell the story behind the name of your company?
Yeah, so our firm is called Bling Capital. It has multiple meanings. Obviously, there's bling bling, so I get that joke a lot. My partner Ben, his name is Benjamin Ling, and his nickname at Google was Bling. So after he left Khosla in 2018 to start his own fund, he actually approached me, and so I didn't tell the story, but he approached me about, hey, you want to start this firm together? I was like, look, I'm happy where I am, but I'll help you with whatever you need. And so one of the things we talked about was like, well, what about the name? And I said, you got to name it Bling Capital. And so it's a little bit of a test as well for entrepreneurs to see if they can figure out that like it's also Ben's name. And you'll be surprised at some people like where they're like, why is it called Bling Capital? It's also, a test for us, so.
Nice. Thank you all so much.